Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Aria Umezawa. I'm a stage director and a co-founder of Amplified Opera, an arts organization that places equity-seeking artists at the center of public discourse. We are also the Canadian Opera Company's newly appointed disruptors in residence. Tonight, we're going to explore the topic of gender and opera. Gender isn't a binary, nor is it fixed. It can change over time. And the truth is that there is incredible diversity in how individuals and groups understand, experience, and express gender. For the purposes of tonight's conversation, when we talk about gender, what we're referring to are the socially constructed roles, behaviors, expressions, and identities of men, women, and gender diverse people, and how these things influence the way they interact and move through the world. So I'm not gonna lie, this isn't a small topic, and a 90-minute panel discussion isn't a ton of time. So I want to acknowledge that over the course of tonight's conversation, there may be concepts or terms that those of you watching at home may want to research further after the discussion. To that end, we've asked our panelists this evening to share some of their favorite resources so you can continue to explore after the talk. You can find the link to those videos in the video description or resources in the video description, or head to the website listed at the bottom of this screen. I'm calling in today from Takaranto, the place in the water where the trees are standing, also known as Toronto. This land is home to many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It's now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. As someone who's a settler, and who lives on and benefits from this land, I am a treaty person. This land is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, as well as the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which states that we have a responsibility to each other and the land. We are to maintain this land in such a way that ensures that everyone has peaceful and equitable access to its resources, and care for it in such a way that ensures it will flourish for generations to come. And if you aren't here on Toronto with me today, I invite you to take a moment to acknowledge the caregivers of the land that you are on. So now for a little bit of event housekeeping. We will begin tonight with a panel discussion, which will be followed by a live Q&A period. You can submit questions using the chat feature on YouTube or Facebook Live. And I'd encourage everyone watching to begin asking those questions now. We're taking notes of your thoughts and we'll save them for the Q&A later on. So please don't be shy and let us know what you want to hear about this evening. We will get to as many of your thoughts as possible. And now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's very special guests, starting with the other Amplified Opera co-founders, opera singer and theater creator Teya Kasahara, mezzo-soprano and dramaturge Marian Newman, and tenor Asita Tenekun. And this evening, we have the distinct pleasure of being joined by three extraordinary artists: performer, creator, and transgender advocate Avery Jean Brennan, actor and singer Jonathan Christopher, and ensemble studio artist Jonah Spungen. For more information on the wonderful work that these artists have done, you can see their bios on the Gender and Opera panel page at www.coc.ca/genderandopera. So now let's dive in, shall we? I am often struck by the fact that while opera has undergone massive changes from a musical perspective, like just the pure harmony in opera has changed drastically, the way we understand gender in opera and the stories we tell about gender haven't really changed much over the past 400 years. We still stick to a fairly strict binary of man and woman, and beyond that, we focus on specific archetypes. And that's a real shame, because when I think about how this impacts not only the artists who create opera, but the audiences who come to see us perform, I'm keenly aware that the stories we give voice to in opera are insufficient. There's so much power in seeing yourself, your story, or your community on stage. We use stories to help us contextualize our own existence. And when our existence is erased or silenced, it can impact how we value ourselves and others. So let's talk about the impact of our depictions of gender in opera. What is being communicated and therefore reinforced? what is missing, and how can we access the full range of stories that make up the human experience? Those were some clips from operas throughout history, and if you're curious about any of our excerpts this evening, we'll credit them at the end of the event. But for now, I'd like to stop my yammering and turn the focus onto our amazing panelists, and I'm hoping to start with you, Jonathan. Perhaps you can lay the foundation for us. What is the story that we tell about gender on operatic stages? Where did it begin, and how has it changed in recent years? So like maybe let's limit it to the last 2 centuries, maybe?
Yes, I'll do my best, Aria. Of course, I'll be talking more of a generalization about opera. And before I started, I wanted to read this one quote to all of you by Alexandre Dumas fils, who wrote the story Le Damo Camelia, which inspired Verdi's Traviata, and his idea on women. Woman is born for subordination and obedience, first to the parents, then to the spouse, later to the child, and always to duty. And that is extremely prominent in 19th century Italian opera specifically. But I just wanted to give a quick overview as well on when opera was first created. Composers and poets and dancers wanted to recreate what they thought was Greek drama. And with that in mind, it was mostly a ton of men that were just working together to see how this could plan out with their idea of recitative and arias and telling these Greek stories in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. Eventually, we go into, with Italian opera, Spanish melodramas were quite the inspiration. So, and within those, I took a workshop with this Dr. Lars Lee at my first year in McGill, and his theory was that most of these stories have an L-shaped plot. And this course that we took was called Dividing Loyalties and Social Conflict in 19th century opera. And for the most part, within these stories of melodrama, there is a soprano at the center who is distraught. She either has to make a decision to remain loyal to her family and the duty that comes with that, or she makes the choice to be with her lover, her man. As we see, in Aida, she has to either help her father Amonasro win over the Egyptians, or she chooses to run off with Radames. And within these stories, no matter what, the woman has this essentially life or death choice. And in the end, no matter what her decision is, she dies. And also within usually around the second act of these, mostly of the bel canto operas, she's so distraught with this decision, she sings a high C to to express that. So we have kind of that story and how that shapes within 19th century opera. And let me see what else I have. Sorry, I'm so nervous. I haven't done a live thing in a while.
Oh my gosh, no. I feel like I'm getting an education right now.
Yes. I did also want to talk briefly about how mezzo-sopranos kind of moved into the position of pants roles in 19th century opera and in Mozart opera. There was, of course, the castrati singers that kind of come from the tradition of church music. And in most of the papal states in the 17th and 18th centuries, women were not allowed to sing in the church. So if there was a young boy that, had vocal promise, before he reached puberty, he was castrated. And those singers, obviously, we don't have today. And there was that tradition that lasted for many centuries. And they were the stars of opera, of much of Handel and Vivaldi and Gluck and so on and so forth. And once those singers were out of favor and castration was out of favor, they had to figure out, there's this beautiful music. How do we get that music up there and onto the stages still? And that's when a lot of mezzo-sopranos ended up taking over these roles and this music. And that tradition obviously is still happening today as well. In the mid 20th century, the countertenor has come back into prominence. Countertenors aren't castrated, of course, but they now get to have a go at these male roles that have usually been specific for women, for mezzo-sopranos mainly. And it's interesting that we see that. And within the 19th century, as women were starting to take these roles on, they got to work with editors and composers and figure out how the tessitura of this music could work for them specifically. And they edited the music, which is something that we kind of don't do these days. And I always found that interesting. I would love to know, if anybody within the panel, when did it become, when did the document, the manuscript of the opera become the Bible? And when did it become the Holy Grail?
Sacred text.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up castrati or pants roll specifically, because I think it's very interesting. From what I understand, the whole reason that young boys were castrated was because there was a belief that you could freeze them in their most virile time by castrating them, that actually they were very sexual beings. So it's interesting that the pants rolls that we now associate with mezzo-sopranos are all hero roles, young, very virile men. They're always very, they're never wilting flowers. Let's just say that for sure. I'm wondering if maybe Asita, you always have interesting things to contribute on this topic. Maybe you can chime in here.
Yeah, I think it's really what I find interesting that Jonathan brought up is this whole setting things in stone that we've, I think, gotten used to in opera. And especially I see it as a misuse and the pigeonholing of the most powerful aspect of opera, which is the exploration of human emotion. I think if we were to look at theater, what makes it the focal point of theater to me is the exploration of ideas, and the focal point of TV is the exploration of character and character building, and with movies it's the narrative. And I think with opera it's the exploration of emotion, and I like to call it the most visceral artistic expression of human emotion. And so I think in that light too, how has opera chosen to portray emotions? How has it gendered and again pigeonholed those emotions to certain voice types or certain genders? And how has it decided to romanticize and glorify certain emotions over others? So if the exploration of raw human emotion is what makes opera special, then it's on the industry to explore them in a responsible way and not misconstrue and unnecessarily gender the most fundamental feature of the human condition, I think. And that's one facet of how like this wide spectrum of gender gets misrepresented or not represented at all in opera.
Yeah. So, Asita, to sort of sum up, you're saying that there's like if there's commonality in the big emotions that these characters feel, and to limit them to certain genders or gender expressions does a disservice to how beautiful and universal some of these big feelings are.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, maybe could we get Jonah maybe just chime in on this one as well?
We sure can. Hello. You know, it's interesting, I think, to think about this idea of the castrati role growing into this pants role, and then potentially and occasionally growing into these countertenor roles, next to the way that opera, or that we think of opera as sometimes being treated like it is set in stone, because in a lot of ways, back when these castrati were in fact castrati and they were being used, like Aria said, they were this like emblem of virility of a time when you know, men were singing in the traditionally female range, and at a time when men wore stockings and high heels, even when they were riding off to war. And obviously our idea of masculinity and virility has grown a lot societally. But somewhere along the way, in opera, we stopped moving forward. So it's clear that we were, we, as an opera singer, I'm just including myself, apparently, that it was moving forward with the times, and then it stopped, and it got sort of set in stone at a time when masculinity meant something very specific that was neither rooted in what it had originally been nor what it currently is.
Yeah, maybe could we, I'd love to zero in on that a little bit more, maybe Jonah. As a performer, obviously you've had the opportunity to inhabit many different characters and many different roles on stage. Do the characters you portray leave room for the ways you understand your own expression of gender?
I think that the characters that we get to portray on stage in opera really only leave room for an incredibly narrow expression of gender. And even if you fit kind of one of the two genders traditionally represented in the canon, if you fit into one of those boxes are still really small, and they become even smaller once you start narrowing in on particular fachs. So I, as a very particular kind of baritone, am expected to portray largely a different sort of archetype of man and masculinity to what a tenor would be expected to portray. And I don't think it allows much of an exploration of what masculinity really means. I mean, if we, even for cisgendered people, gender is still, it's not going to be a single stroke, and masculinity is not really going to be the same, right, to all men. And so in a lot of the roles that I have gotten to look at, and particularly the ones that I've been looking at recently, the more serious and traditional canonical roles for baritones in opera, there's a theme of a lot of jealousy and control and telling women what to do and being suspicious of them, or finding out another man has done something you don't approve of, and your solution to this disagreement is that you're going to make them dead, either yourself or you'll have somebody do it for you. And you know, in theater, I think all kinds of art forms that involve acting, we want to be cast in roles that we're going to be able to inhabit really thoroughly and exist fully as an artist within those roles, and really embody them. And not just bring kind of what's in the music and what's in the script onto the stage, but also imbue that with ourselves as artists and our own realities and what we hope to say. And that's a part of what makes it art, right? But in opera, the physiology of the vocal cords that you're born with kind of get to dictate the types of characters that you get to play. So I was born with a baritone throat, and now I get to play this one particular type of man all the time, forever. And to a certain extent, acting is acting, and we portray the roles that we have to portray as best we can. And I love performing those roles, and partially specifically because they are different from everything that I personally hope being a man means for me. But when I think about this conversation as not sort of centered around a cisgendered white man, and the conversation's not typically centered around us, and it shouldn't be. And when it's not, we kind of are able to see how this incredibly narrow idea of what kind of characters people should be able to portray on stage can be really limiting. And so I think it's true as well when it comes to those of us who haven't had to struggle as much with our identity, that constantly being shoved into such a small box ultimately restricts what we're able to do with our artistry, and how we allow ourselves as people to intertwine with ourselves as artists. So, I mean, as a man who was never particularly traditionally masculine growing up, I think when I found opera, it gave me the space in the community where I was able to express myself openly and explore my identity without worrying that my value as a person would be tied up in where I was along the sliding scale of masculinity. But simultaneously, this experience on stage where I was constantly having to man myself up and be more aggressive and more dangerous and more upright and controlled, and to embody, again, this one very particular understanding of what men are like.
You've touched on so many things, Jonah. My brain is on fire, but I also just want to acknowledge Deb Joy. Thank you for that wonderful message. What a little bright spot. We're so glad you're here with us. I'm wondering if maybe we can bring Taya into the conversation here, because Taya, I know you used to be an ensemble member. You've got a long career in the opera industry, and you're now branching out to different mediums. Maybe would you like to react to anything that Jonah mentioned?
Definitely. Thank you, Aria. Thank you, Jonah. Yeah, it's really great to hear just your experience, Jonah, first of all, and how this art form has allowed you to explore masculinity in your own way. And for me, it was very interesting I think, to discover more of my femininity through opera, but then to see how the ways in which femininity or female characters or women characters on stage were very much limited, either with the ingenue, kind of that angel whore binary, or then you have that fallen woman or the evil character, or someone who is base or vile or ambitious or goes mad or maybe is very fragile. And just only having these few limited expressions of what a woman could do on stage. And at a certain point for me, I think there was kind of a breaking point where what I was feeling in these characters on a professional sense, it was also being reflected in the rehearsal room, in the industry, in whatever space I was navigating that happened to be an opera space. And then also reflecting out that into society at large to see, oh, it's not just opera, it's a systemic issue. This is the patriarchy that we live in, this white, cis, hetero patriarchy. So it really was the catalyst, actually, for me to start to discover my gender and express it in a way that wasn't ticking these boxes, that allowed me to really undergo a transformation and an education, a lifelong pursuit to really start to decolonize my thinking, my conditioning of how I was brought up, all of those kinds of things. So it actually, yeah, it was a great catalyst for that.
Taya, thank you so much for those reflections. Before I call in another panelist, Bruce Reed is saying you have an amazing voice.
Thank you very much.
And Bruce, you are absolutely correct. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I wonder, Marian, as a mezzo soprano, you also inhabit a lot of roles for women. And do you similarly feel anything like what Taya described, where these expectations that you're expected to embody your characters in a way, to quote the great Andrea Donaldson, out off stage in your operatic, performer persona, in any way?
Yeah, this is so interesting. I'm so impressed by everyone already, and really intrigued by this topic. Mezzos, some people you may have heard, get to play the roles of witches, bitches, or britches. and occasionally the nanny. So we're the boys, the teenagers, unless a countertenor is doing that at this stage. So yeah, the seductresses or the evil women. And we're either looking for sweet treats in the forest, or crushing on every skirt on the stage, or trying to sleep with someone, or trying to kill them. So do I feel represented by this? I mean, maybe on some days, but not fully. And I think that it's been touched on already that there is more to us than what opera represents, as at least in the canon. And more recently, I've played roles in new operas that are closer to who I really feel like I am. And every time I play a role, I get to embody whatever that person is. And so I have learned things from Carmen. I've never felt comfortable being sexy in public, but it is something that I became more comfortable with by playing Carmen, because that helped me to realize that you just are what you are, and you are who you are. And if people find that attractive and sexy, cool, but you don't have to put it on. You don't have to do anything. So I learned something from Carmen. I learned I don't know if I learned it. I was already pretty mischievous, but I learned some of that from Rosina, just like how to play a trick and to get your own way and to embody that and like dig right in. I've played Hansel, so a boy who is like eating treats in the forest and getting himself into trouble. And I've played the mother in Hansel and Gretel. And I still have one more role that I haven't played in that, which is the witch. And maybe when my wrinkles really start to take over, I'll get that opportunity. Who knows?
Well, I would love to see that witch's ride for sure. And we can rejoice and eat and chasing down those carbs in the forest too. Marion, you spoke a little bit about the roles you've been able to inhabit, and how each sort of role brings a new flavor to you, both as a person and as an artist. But I want to sort of look beyond maybe just opera for a second and ask, looking to other art forms like theater or musical theater, there seems to be more room to reframe stories and cast accordingly. So, we've mentioned before the COC system, and how that sort of means that we expect that certain voice types are going into certain roles. But in other genres, that doesn't really seem to be the case so much. For example, in recent years, Toronto has seen women cast in the roles of Prince Hamlet and King Lear, just to name a few. What do you think it is about opera that really prevents us from exploring beyond this very specific performance practice?
I think you already brought that up, or someone did, in the idea that opera is sacred is what is getting in the way. In theater where actors are speaking, it's easier to read the lines of any character and then embody the role as an actor with whatever voice you happen to have. And I don't know if anybody's seen Why Not's theaters. Prince Hamlet included sign language and casting that was gender bent and cross-cultural. So there is a lot of possibility there, because a composer hasn't already set a role within a certain vocal range. So I think that there are voice types that could switch places, like a tenor could sing soprano and a mezzo could sing baritone, say, but the way a piece is orchestrated will determine whether or not you would be heard over the orchestra, or it would mix well with the voice in that range. And there is this idea that opera is absolutely sacred, as it is, at least the operatic canon. And so that really limits what is available in terms of playing with what has been set for us. Unless somebody feels brave enough to face the derision that would come from changing a score of a work from the operatic canon, reframing a role and who it is played by is really difficult.
certainly handle with care is generally the message we're sent as opera artists when we're past music to interpret. Jonah, do you have any thoughts maybe on that element, like of this endless debate of prima la musica when it comes to our art form, first the music?
Always. But I am still busy envisioning an entire Hansel and Gretel that is actually just Marion, all of the roles. But I will move on from that. Yeah, I completely agree. I think that there's a perpetual debate in opera about well, a lot of things, but one of them is, are we making this art form? Are we presenting this art form as a function of the world that we're performing it in? Are we presenting this art form as a function of the world that it was written for? And yeah, where it differs in a lot of ways from, say, like theater, is that just purely logistically, if you take two people and give them a script, you can put on a play. Opera tends to be, and there are certainly companies that are absolutely tearing down this narrow concept of what opera is, but it tends to be a very large, very high budget production with a ton of people on stage, in the orchestra pit, behind the scenes. And I do think when you have large companies, large groups, lots of governing bodies, it creates a sort of like inherently hierarchical structure in which very specific people with specific backgrounds get to decide how things should be done. And we don't necessarily move through a career as opera creators in a particularly fluid way. I think many people do. We don't always end up where we think we're going to end up, but the process of being an opera singer, for example, seems like a very straightforward, linear path. And so you may or may not get to be included in conversations about, should we be switching up the entire concept of how voice types are cast as what kinds of characters, because you're a singer. That's not your job.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Jonah, if you keep talking this way, you're going to get me on my genius soapbox. So before maybe I can get into that a little bit, that's off topic. Maybe a good person to reflect on this as well would probably be Avery Jean. Avery Jean, you work in musical theater as a creator. You have a lot of experience outside of the opera world specifically. Maybe you can speak to some of your experiences in musical theater and theater.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, so much of the barriers that are there in the opera industry are actually quite similar to the musical theater industry, because it does come down at the end of the day to the way that we associate voice and tone and pitch with gender. And a lot of them, even musicals these days, are still being written with, like, if you're a woman, you're singing soprano or alto. Maybe you can dip down into tenor if you want. And then if you're a man, you're singing tenor, baritone, bass, and if you have an awesome falsetto, you get to, riff a little bit up here for a while and come back down. And there's really still not a lot of room for flexibility within that. Like, if you listen to my voice, like, I have a broken voice that was changed through puberty. Kind of live in that baritone tenor world. I can't play men anymore, though. And it's not necessarily a matter of not being able to, like, put me on stage, put me in a costume, whatever, I can. But when it comes down to the emotional, mental accessibility of that, putting me in situations in which I'm perceived as male is putting me into a situation of harm. That is causing me great mental, emotional, and at times even physical pain. And so I cannot go on stage and do stuff like that. It's not just a matter of being unable to, or not wanting to. It's a matter of being physically unable to.
Yeah.
And when we have voice types gendered like this, it creates this barrier to being able to do anything. Like, I get callbacks for female parts all the time, and I come in every now and then, and it's like, here's a mezzo soprano song, and you have to belt through, and I'm like, well, I'm not gonna make it.
Yeah.
And then when you put it into the opera world, where there's even so much more technical training required to achieve what you achieve in this industry, that just adds another barrier because there are so few teachers as well that understand the needs of transgender voices, the capabilities of transgender voices, what happens to transmasculine people on testosterone versus what happens when you're a transfeminine person like myself, and there's really no way to go back up. Like, you can train your falsetto a bunch, but some of us just don't have the physical voice type to be able to sustain singing a whole show in our falsettos either. And because of the way that the canon has been written historically, there's not a lot of room for what to do with that. But if we do start to allow ourselves to transpose, to rearrange, to explore new ways of doing things, then that can bring forward new options. But then if we also look at, we have a duet, for example, you transpose it to fit my voice in, suddenly Buddy, I'm singing opposite, he's singing down a whole fifth from what he's supposed to be. And it's like, oh, this doesn't fit here at all either. And so there's just so much, because we were never considered during the creation of a lot of these pieces through centuries, even this century, even in operas about us, our voice type's not being considered. Not to throw too much shade. But just when our voices are not even thought of during the creation, it just creates this atmosphere where there's no room for our voices to be fit in. And so it just creates this huge barrier for us to come in.
You know, Avery Jean, you make me think, you're making me think right now of how I think sometimes when we have discussions like this that are, you know, I think quite charged for some people to talk about issues of identity and gender and these types of things, I think oftentimes people come to it with the mentality of like, we need to hold on to this because you're trying to tell us what not to do and to like clamp down, and that's our instinct, is to clamp down. But really what you make me think is that when having these discussions, it's so much more generative, I think, to think about what could be possible if we could just open things up and consider what we could do for our art form. Then the possibilities truly become infinite. Which leads me to my question for you, Avery Jean, which is that a lot of what we've been talking about so far, you know, the COC system, accepted interpretations of canonical works, these really fall under the broader umbrella of performance practice, which was a term that I brought up earlier. And to be fair to the artists working on these productions, we as audience members have become really used to seeing these beloved stories told in very specific ways. So I wonder what your thoughts are on what the consequences are of setting performance practice in stone.
Oh, I have so many thoughts. And they fall into two camps, and I will try my best to address both of them as quickly and thoroughly as possible at the same time. The first camp is what happens on stage, and the other step is everything else. On stage, a lot of what I was just speaking about in terms of voice, and the ways that music has been composed historically, the way that these shows have been composed historically, which we need to start creating new works in which we can explore these other facets of voice, as well as looking back on old facets of voice and exploring old works. Like, well, what happens when this female part, which is written as a soprano, what happens if we drop her entire range down an octave? Who knows? We can try. As well, on stage when we're watching, when we hear certain voice types, we still go to this space of like, oh, this is that gender. So if we're listening to just a recording without seeing any of the visual, for example, if you turned off my camera now, please don't do it, I look great. But if you did, a lot of you sitting at home would be hearing my voice and thinking, oh, listen to that man that's talking. But you look at these visuals, you see my name, you see my pronouns there, you see all these other things about me to learn, oh, that's not a man. But your instinctual listening is hearing a male voice. The same to you, Aria, like you speak, a lot of people are, if you took away your visual, they would think immediately, oh, this is a woman. And that also comes down to us as audience members of like, how do we listen to voice? Why do we gender voice in certain tones, certain pitches, certain timbres, certain anything? Why do we have to go there? And then off stage, there's so many things of just like, this is just always how production has been handled. We have dressing rooms like this. We have the male ensemble dressing room and the female ensemble dressing room. We have costumers like this. We have women send us measurements like this. Men send us measurements like that. We don't include pronouns in most program bios. There are just so many things in which off stage that we also can be doing that we just I spend most of my career going to the different companies that I work for saying, hey, I actually require this kind of thing. Like, yes, I'm playing a woman, but my measurements aren't going to look like this, so you need to take them a little bit differently. Or I actually need a different dressing room area because there are certain things that I need to do to get ready to go on stage that I am not comfortable doing in front of cisgender artists. Or if you put me in a bio or put my thing in a program, please include my pronouns, because especially if I'm playing a woman, even if I'm playing a woman, rather, you're still not going to look at me and think, oh, Avery Jean uses they, them pronouns. And then people are talking about me outside of the show, referring to me incorrectly, and then that shows up in a review, and then that gets spread, people read it, and then a false perception of who I am as a person gets spread throughout our entire community.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just, with this rigid way of thinking that is what I always run into when I'm talking to these companies of like, hey, can we actually start doing this? And it's always like, oh, I might have to ask this person and this person and this person, and I don't know if we can make that change, which happens anytime I work anywhere over the last half a decade now, since my transition. And it's just that it's only the thinking that is what gets in the way, because the second they realize, oh, if I actually just do the thing, we can do the thing. It's very easy to add one extra thing in a program. It's very easy to provide me with a safe dressing space. It's very easy to take my measurements slightly differently, or to consider different parts of my body when costuming me differently than you would with other women or other femme people.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you actually start doing it, it's very easy, but that takes a step in curbing what I call in my work fragility. It takes a step in looking at what is it that you're bumping up against when you're resisting these kinds of changes. And for a lot of people, what that actually is the work that it takes to stop and look at themselves, look at the work that they have done historically, and see where they have caused harm. And hearing that they have caused harm historically, even unintentionally, is a very uncomfortable thing to do. And I experience it a lot myself in the work that I do in decolonization. I look back on my past and I go, oh, I did these horrible things. And you have this first response of self-defense, but you have to start to separate intention from impact in this kind of work. It's like your intentions are very often, everyone, I believe firmly, wants to do the right thing, wants to support people, wants to be a positive force. Our impact does not always align with our intention, based on our education on a certain subject, based on our understanding, based on a community understanding even. And it's about focusing on the impact as opposed to the intention. Because if your intention is always to do good in this world, that has to mean that you want to work on your impacts. And if someone is telling you that your impact is not achieving what you think it is, go back to your intention. You want to do good, you redirect your impact.
I feel like I need that on either like a mug or a t-shirt or like a poster, something to remind me.
I have it tattooed on my entire back. It's very long.
You were getting many shout outs as you were speaking, Avery Jean. Everyone is really resonating. Yes, you are definitely so articulate and amazing. Thank you for sharing. I'm wondering, Taya, do you want to maybe chime in on this one as well? I know you have many thoughts on this matter as well.
Yeah, I just also want to just say thank you so much, Avery Jean, for saying all of that. And anyone who's just starting to chime in right now, rewind the last 5 minutes, watch it again, and then watch it again, because there's so much, I'm going to get emotional. There's so much truth there. There's so much you bringing your full self and your fragility and your experience, and you're advocating not only for yourself, but for so many artists, for me too. So thank you.
You're gonna be feeling things.
Yeah, totally, right? Like, whoa.
Should we just have a crying break for a second? Is that?
Yeah, maybe, right? Like, but I also think like, I want to acknowledge that advocating for oneself is really hard and it's exhausting. And the more we can listen and recognize these hard moments for people, the more I think like people like we can make those small differences, and that's going to change this industry. Yeah, sorry about that. Bringing the tears today.
We say at Amplified Opera all the time that we're very cry positive.
We are
co-founder. You should not be apologized.
And listen, it's Pisces season. It's time to cry.
That's right. Thank you, Avery Jean. Yeah. And thank you, Aria. Yeah, but please just rewind the last 6 minutes. You don't have to listen to my crying, and listen to Avery Jean again, because that was so, so important. So thank you. Yeah, I love what you said. I was really intrigued also by this idea of like how we have ingrained gender in the voice and how we hear voices and how we hear sound. And that is also opening up a lot of the ways in which I sing certain roles because of their gender, like on the facade, like on the character or the costuming. And what's interesting is to be able to play different characters and play different genders for myself, but also listening to where my, like Taya, like my identity or my experience wants to inform that character or interpret that character, and bringing more of myself to a role, for example, or singing something that might sound masculine, which I've been told in a voice lesson, oh, you can't sound like that. That is too strident or forceful, or it's too this, or it's all these masculine tenor qualities. And then I'm like, okay, so what is a feminine sound? So I have to like actually manipulate or a sound or not contort, but like limit and sculpt the sound that comes out to make it more feminine. And so, yeah, it's really opening up my my conditioning of how we gender sound. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Asita, you know, I know we talk about this idea of, you know, cementing things like performance practice into stone. I also would be curious to know, as a tenor, with Taya having just mentioned that they have to sing, that their natural sound has tenor-like qualities to it, if you have any reactions to that.
I think, firstly, I think anything I have to say would only dilute some of the really, really powerful things that have been spoken about. So I'll try and keep this brief, which is, I think what anyone wants from life as a human being is to be seen. That's what I think. And to be seen as they go about their daily lives, to be recognized for who they are, and to see themselves everywhere else as well, and in the art that they take in. So in a practical sense, it makes me think about how the pieces that we are used to hearing in opera, the traditional, what we call the canon, a lot of those roles were written for specific people and to show off the specific parts of their voice. But centuries later, there are so many other people who are still able to sing those roles, still able to excel at them. So it wasn't just that person. So I'm thinking about how exciting it would be for the creation of newer works, even, that cater to specific voices and specific individuals, that don't conform to the traditional gender binary. And moving forward, that in itself is a collection of music that can be sung by people who, in their own right, don't conform to a gender binary as well, or any specific sort of way of living. And yeah, I think that's one of the ways to move forward.
Yeah. Asita, we're going to get back to you in 1 second, but on that note of not trying to write for more types of voices, why don't we throw ourselves to a clip that talks about things that all women do?
Che giovani, vecchie e belle e brutte, ripetete con me, così fan tutte. Così fan tutte.
Huh. Sita, I kind of want to stick with you for a second, if that's okay.
Sure.
Maybe we can go behind the scenes, actually. So off the stage and behind the curtain. The majority of leaders in a rehearsal space, so for example, the directors and conductors, are men, and specifically cisgender men who are framing the stories that appear on stage through their own personal frame of reference. So how does this impact the artists in the room, and how does it impact their ability to bring their own experiences to the table?
That's really interesting, Arya. Taya touched on this closer to the beginning of this session, and it's been mentioned a few times too. And I think the dynamic that you've suggested, it permeates through every facet of our lives, right? I mean, the hierarchical systems that the more dominant forces in society have chosen for us to live under are based on preserving power and limiting access. And that system was created by men and created to serve men. But beyond that, it also serves anyone who believes in maintaining control in an inequitable way. So I would also say that regardless of who is in those positions of leadership, it still requires several elements of that strong man mentality and lots of things that we identify as being tenets of toxic masculinity in order to function in it and maintain that system. And that restrictive nature of it means also restricting any perspectives that don't serve that status quo. I'm looking back at my own experiences as an artist, and I find it interesting that the most collaborative rehearsal spaces I've been in, have been spaces with non-male leadership, where the perspectives of the female characters who are often sort of the passive recipients of male emotion and action in a scene, that their perspectives are explored and given equal weight to a greater extent than in primarily male-driven rehearsal rooms. And I think it's also very interesting that the most fulfilling experiences I've had as an opera artist in the past few years have been in spaces that have been female and non-binary led, and mostly Indigenous female and non-binary led. And these are spaces that actively reject this colonial idea of hierarchy and have challenged and explored inclusive alternatives to that system. And of course, just reshaping and laying that new foundation in itself changes the art. It changes the perspectives, and it changes who's at the table and whose views can be at the table. And that leads me to thinking, if those experiences continue to hold true, then I have to ask, why stop at the rehearsal room, right? I mean, why not extend that same challenge to other parts of the industry and rethinking challenging traditional structures, which are built so that one perspective can hold sway over all others. So one gendered perspective can easily dismiss the rest. Because just to finish up here, I strongly believe that, look, it's important for the art on stage to change. But I think I also strongly believe the more the business and the administrative culture of the industry changes to something radically more inclusive off stage, the more the preservation of misogyny and harmful ideas of gender on stage become untenable with the core values of the industry. And that would have to change as a result. So that's my long-winded response to your question. Sorry.
Oh, and yet you hit so many great points, Asita. I kind of want to bring Avery Jean back to respond to them, because I have a feeling they'll have some things to contribute. Avery Jean, what are your thoughts?
Oh, not many. No. As you saw, I'm not very long-winded. But how do I put this? There is a certain kind of lived experience that people who face different marginalizations in our society gain through having to advocate for ourselves in almost any situation, both inside a rehearsal room and then in the rest of our lives. And the ways in which those intersections of different marginalizations coming together can also overlap each other and force us to experience these kinds of things that shape who we are and shape the ways that we approach art, the ways that we approach conflict or in a room, or how we approach collaboration. And there is a degree of, for just speaking from my own experiences, of working with cisgender, white, heterosexual men as directors, there is a level of, even when their intentions are pure, the impacts that they're hitting are still quite good. Part of the ways that their impact, though, can fail is a lack of education and a lack of understanding of what it's like to be someone who has to advocate for themselves at these ways. And with those experiences all stacking up, when I'm in a room that is led, especially if I'm the only trans person in a room, which is every time I'm on a project, there is a degree of educating the people around me that I have to do. Like, this is what I need in order to be supported. This is what someone like me would approach this work, and here is why, from this background, from this trans perspective, from this trans lens, which always requires me to stop everything that I'm doing, stop my rehearsal process, stop my learning of the music, stop my just work in understanding the piece for myself as an artist. On top of all of that work, I now also have to play the role of educator and advocate. And I spend a lot of my time now in my career doing that, as opposed to actually creating or performing. And that is even spills into projects where I'm supposed to just be performing. And then I look around at the rest of the room, and the people I'm working with don't have to do that same kind of labor. Or they may, but in a different format, from my colleagues who are racialized, my colleagues who are disabled, who may have to also do the kind of educational labor. And there's a certain unity that comes between us often of like, yeah, I see you having to do this, you see me having to do this, great. But a lot of the times, there are so few of us from these communities that are placed in charge of these rooms, especially the higher the level of budget, the higher level of kind of like national renown. There's so few of us in these positions that it just kind of, it creates a room that's already ill-equipped to welcome us. And you can't just put us all in a room and hope, like, great, and now our problems of diversity are solved. You're like, well, no, like, you can't just put us into a room that is still going to be a space that is, it's not because someone is cisgender male, but this person does require that education, though, to be able to support these other people in the room.
Yeah.
And that work is so new. It's so new in our industry. It's so new in our communities. It's so new in our world that it's still taking a lot of time. And it's fair for things to take time as we learn and as we shape our understandings. But in that time that we haven't yet landed at these more informed, safer periods of our history, people are still getting harmed along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that.
Avery, Jean, likewise, a lot to respond to there. I'm wondering if we can bring Jonathan back into the conversation at this point. I think you probably have some thoughts on this too, Jonathan. What would...
I do. Geez, the amount of tears that I've already cried just through hearing everyone's testimonies the past 50 minutes has been incredible. And I'm having so many realizations about myself too. And I, as a cisgender man, what do I bring into a rehearsal space? And I actually realized that I bring a lot of fear into my space because I'm always, I don't know, it's just been indoctrinated in me to kind of be almost seen and not heard, or just kind of do what I need to do to get the job done. And as a performer, I kind of wait until I get onto the stage to kind of feel free to do the exploration that I want as an actor and as a singer. But of course, that's what the rehearsal room is supposed to be. And we've talked about how texts can be sacred, or how performances are sacred, but rehearsals are also a sacred space too. And to really think about what it means to feel safe as a performer, or sorry, my camera keeps on going on and off. I've tried to really figure that out. And the rooms just, has just been said before, the rooms where I felt safest to explore have been rooms where those in charge are not necessarily cisgender white men. And that's been most of my projects for the last couple of years, are working with people where they establish how is everyone feeling, or what did we learn about this music or this text or this choreography that that can help facilitate the story, or what isn't in the text or in the music or in the choreography that can facilitate the story as well. When I was working with Hamilton, the resident director, she came up to me and she said, you can do all of this work to understand who George Washington is, but at the core of the story, you don't necessarily have to do that. This is a father-son relationship between Washington and Hamilton. And the fact that she said that to me just kind of gave me freedom. And I want everybody in a rehearsal space, from the director, from the conductor, from the stage manager, from everyone, to just have that freedom. And I feel so blessed that I've had that the past couple of years in the projects that I've worked on. Whereas when I was a young artist, especially as a young artist in opera programs and regional opera companies throughout the continent, I've never really felt that freedom, and it almost kind of always put a bad taste in my mouth, and I never understood where my respect level was, and many of those rooms were conducted by cis men, and I don't know if that has anything to do with it, or there's always a time crunch, especially when you're working in regional opera. You have 2 weeks to put on a Tosca, and you hire someone who's done Tosca many times before, you hire someone who's done Cavaradossi many times before, and it's the young artists that do the Confirmari roles. And so you're trying to learn this huge piece and trying to make sure that you're up to that you can serve what is being asked of you. But it can be hard sometimes when you don't feel like when you're not in a safe space in order to do so.
Yeah. Jonathan, I'm so sorry. Just as you're talking about how the time pressure limits expression, to say that time now is of the essence, and I think I have to move the conversation.
No, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. But I was hoping, actually, I love that you brought up this idea of freedom, Jonathan, a number of times. And I think that leads well into our last question for this evening. And for that, I'd like to bring Taya back. Taya, what is the future for opera? What are some of the possibilities on our horizon as we look to the stories we want to bring and get to our stages and give voice to?
The future is very bright. I think after having this conversation with all of these wonderful people, these people bringing me a lot of hope and inspiration, I think it's really bright. I think we're at a really important time in our industry, in the world, to really crack open what has always been done, and to reflect and to make more room for many more possibilities. So artists can feel empowered. They can feel safe. They can feel safe enough to be vulnerable, to bring all of themselves to the art, to whether they're creating, whether they're interpreting, whether they're collaborating, whether they're performing. Because I really feel once they feel safe, once they feel empowered, they will have that freedom, which Jonathan was talking about, to imagine, to reimagine characters, to create new ones, to reclaim the old ones and give them new life with their imprint, their unique artistic imprint on them. We have so much wonderful technology right now that we've been utilizing for the past year because of this pandemic, to bring us closer together, to try to even put art that is meant for the stage, that is meant for these great acoustic halls, through our computers and all our different devices. And why not utilize that technology for transposing many different roles, really opening up the score and taking it off its sacred pedestal. I'm going to say that. So we can really allow this canon to expand, and to expand for so many people that have been excluded or pushed out or whitewashed or pinkwashed in order to be brought in to this tiny, tiny space, So I think there is just so much hope and excitement and possibility for what we could do by bringing new stories. So really putting time and energy and resources into creating new works and creating a Canadian imprint in the canon, but also just allowing it to expand and go deeper and go beyond what we've been seeing on the main stage and the mainstream industry for so long. So
absolutely. Jonathan, I feel terrible for cutting you off. Maybe you have some thoughts on this question too.
Oh, don't worry. I was blabbling far too long anyway. I completely agree, Tay, on everything that you're saying. What I think, especially this past year, the pandemic has taught us, especially like going through, for me as a Black artist as well, going through the Black Lives Matter movement at the end of May of last year, and also being a member of the cast of Hamilton, our company, the Broadway community came to a reckoning and realized the systemic racism that happens from whether it's being on stage to meeting people on the at the stage door, to whether or not Black women always whenever they wear their wigs, they just say put cornrows in your hair, whereas the white cis women get to do whatever they want underneath. Why can't there be more options to explore how to make everyone feel comfortable in the workplace? And through this conversation that we're having now, I think that's we're at a start, and I'm so glad that Amplified Opera is becoming a disruptor in residence with COC to explore these options. My hope, which is what I see right now as well, is that it's not just one or two people that are saying this is how a production has to be done, or the donor saying, give us the cardboard copy of La Traviata, that's all we want. I'm hoping that we can be asked as performers to be artists and to have a voice in how these stories can be told, whether it's traditionally, because I love history, I love tradition, and seeing what performance practices were at this point in time and whether or not we can try to recreate it. I think that's interesting. But the fact that it's the norm and that it's kind of, it can't be molded into something new is where we're stuck. And this is why we're having our conversation today. So I'm so looking forward to seeing once we open up again and get to have interpersonal interactions, not just virtual, what can be done. But not to say that the virtual realm, I think there are new ways to explore these options.
Absolutely. Marion just finished her first foray as a dramaturge, so maybe for a new work. So maybe she'll have some thoughts to round out this part of the discussion with. Marion, any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. And everything you said, Taya, about busting up the canon and making things different. Yes, totally. But also, not that many years ago, honestly, maybe 6, I remember being approached to say, we want to commission a piece that is for Indigenous singers, but we don't think there are enough of them. So could we either have the roles played by other people who kind of look brown, or what do we do? And I say, write the roles and the singers will be there. I've known of many Indigenous singers throughout my path and my growth that have started out, gone to university, have beautiful voices, and then they just don't have anything to step into. So now that those roles are being made available and we are saying you have to cast Indigenous first, the roles are there. This could fit for gender as well. And it just why are we limiting ourselves in that way? Also, composers used to make changes to their own scores and have how many times have we gone to a gig and it's I hope I have the right version. which thing, and how many times have I emailed to say, is it this score? What about, is it aria A or aria B? Or keep making those changes and keep opening that up. And maybe there are composers who are willing to write various versions of things so that so that we can keep that practice of yes, write it for the people who are available for this particular gig, but keep it open so that we can keep growing in our understanding of who can play what roles.
Yeah.
I think that I have hope that that can happen. And certainly that whole matriarchal leadership thing that was mentioned earlier is, I'm going to go back to playing the role of Dr. Wilson in Missing. And the first time I did it, I went along with the way everything was being run. Well, not everything, but I went along with the way things were being run in the rehearsal space to a degree, but I was really finding my own voice because I was playing an Indigenous matriarch who has a lot of power and say, but also the understanding of what it is to be invisible. I, in the room as Marion, felt this, anything that is really uncomfortable here and that can be fixed should be. Our process has to be different. And in doing some different gigs, and usually with Yvette Nolan leading, but Marjorie Chan is another, Jani Lauzon is another. These rooms are always run where I feel really safe and I feel really like I can just dig in and be a whole person. And I can be me. And in creating a new work, which is what you referred to earlier, Arya Namwayut, which means we are all one, creating roles that people can really dig into and be themselves in with a community so that everybody has a say in the creation of it is a definite cool direction that I love. I love that we're going in.
Absolutely. Camille is saying, this is beautiful, Marion. Thank you. And I agree. Marion, I hear from you a lot of evolution and a lot of revolution for this art form. And I think, for me personally, a work that embodies both evolution and revolution, if I may be so bold as to shamelessly plug for a moment, is our very own Taya Kasahara's show, The Queen and Me. And they've been so kind as to provide us with a clip. So why don't we throw to that as a little inspiration as we lead out of this section.
The opera singer who embodies this thing must show up every day ready to try again, equipped with only her craft and sheer willpower, and she explores the vastness of the human conditions through opera. And then, like clockwork, she is escorted into the factory where she must contort herself into one of thousands of two-dimensional paper cutouts, representative of what it means to be female and bypassing, subservient to the greater sex. She is the naked, nameless dog. Under all these layers you've assigned to me, dress up with at your fancy soirées, champagne and oysters, the men in paper suits, the ladies hanging off their arms, dressed as Grecian nuns and cupcake princesses. Her as your dancing monkey, your property, your prize to be paraded about, yet still forced to compete with the other girls in the club. This is the life. Glorious, operatic life. She's traveling the world, chasing the next audition, singing for herself of her entire apartment in one suitcase, never looking back, ready, willing and able, always at a moment's notice. Just a narcissistic, sociopathic adrenaline junkie after a trick for her trick. She is the woman. Seriously, she is the other type of woman. Inked, buzzed, disguised to manipulate, tease, and tantalize. Even off the stage, she doesn't know where she begins or ends anymore.
Yeah.
Well, Taya, thank you so much for letting us share that with everybody at home tonight. So I just sort of wanted to sum things up about this discussion now that we're at the end. I think it's worth noting that a narrow depiction of gender doesn't just impact the working environments for artists. So it absolutely does. I think we've heard many examples of that this evening. but it also limits what we as artists are able to offer to the public and how we're able to serve our community through our art. And I think ultimately that's a goal of many artists, and certainly I think every single one of the artists on this call. So when it comes down to it, we're here to give voice to the stories that are impacting our communities today. And so I guess segue, speaking of community, we did promise that we would get to as many of your questions as possible. And so I'm just going to scroll down and see what we have got here. Celia Hart has a question for Marion. Marion, can you tell us more about the Indigenous perspective on opera, which is a European or colonialist form of music? What are your thoughts on that?
Am I there? Yes. Hi. It is. My thoughts are many layered, so I'll try and be quick. But as Indigenous ways of being, which included music, was being made illegal and being mined and put into museums, much of which still sits there, we were forced to go to schools and into families that were not our own and taught European ways, which included European music. And so I consider it absolutely free game for us. It is, we have every right to be performing that. And I know the question isn't about right, but just to tie that in to what do I, it is a way of telling story through song. And all cultures have a deep history of telling stories through song. And definitely Indigenous cultures across North America have that culture as well. And if we do it with an orchestra, really, really loud voices and costumes, then it's just really a louder form of Indigenous song told through opera.
Thanks, Marion. Margaret Cormier is asking what casting and directorial decisions might play in how we understand gender in opera. She's giving the example of baritone Lucia Lucas playing Don Giovanni as a trans woman. Any thoughts from the group on that? Avery Jean, I see you have some thoughts.
Ta-da! What a surprise. Yeah, the first part of the question, can you put that back up again?
Yeah.
Okay. So the role of the panel. Well, I mean, yeah, similar tying into what I was saying earlier about making space for different voice types from all kinds of different genders, having someone like Lucia coming in with this baritone voice. For Lucia, it's very wonderful that she does still feel comfortable to play men on stage. There are still so many trans feminine people who do not. And that does come down to casting decisions. That does come down to production and figuring out, okay, but like if we do want to cast this trans feminine person, does this individual, which is not speaking for the full collective of trans people, does this individual feel comfortable doing that, yes or no? You have that conversation with that individual, and they can make that decision for themselves. But to make an assumption that all trans feminine people, like Lucia, would be comfortable doing that, that is where harm can come in again. And so it comes down to the responsibility of the casting director of production and figuring out, am I putting people in places in which this individual person will be safe emotionally and mentally?
Yeah. And I think you bring up a great point that we've also touched on earlier in this conversation, which is just about opening up dialogue between artists and not only the collaborators that they're working on with the show, but with the organization they're working for in general, to really get a sense of, how we can be more nuanced and open and thoughtful about the way that we are producing art in this day and age. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Avery Jean. Zoe Band is asking, how can opera directors help break down those barriers and make inclusive gender decisions despite the compositional barriers, if you will, of our traditional gems? And I think maybe Taya is going to jump in on this one. Taya, what are your thoughts?
Hi, yeah. I think what is exciting is to just take out that barrier for a director and look at, from when creating a concept, to look at if we went even further and went past using the score basically as more of a blueprint and not like stone or the Bible, and letting one's imagination really take flight, and not limiting it to, say, a specific range or tessitura, or even character, and that we can really see more like a wider imagination or reimagination of these canonical works, which we have seen in theater, which we see in TV and film, Shakespeare. So that would be really exciting to also empower directors to think and to collaborate with the other musicians on the team, other designers on the team, the artists, the singers, everyone, to really go beyond that score.
Yeah. Fire the Canon as your workshop title.
That's right.
That is absolutely true. Thank you so much. I hope that answered your question, Zoe. Bruce Reed is asking, has a specific question about Bruce Reed has a specific question about some of opera's canon and asks what you would do to fix, quote unquote, Don Giovanni or Così fan tutte. Jonah, I think, is willing to take a stab, if you will, at this question. What are your thoughts, Jonah?
Hi, a stab indeed. I think when you're putting a show on stage, especially a show that inherently incorporates material that can be problematic and or complicated, the sheer act of putting it on stage isn't necessarily an act of condoning or supporting the ideas represented by the show, or by the person who made the show, so on and so forth. And I think in the building of the show, in the casting of the show, in the directing of the show, and in the singers' portrayals of those characters, you ask yourself questions like, who is this person? Why are they doing what they're doing? How is this idea? In something like Don Giovanni, you have, a very bad character, without getting into the specifics, in the title role. So how do people who behave this way in our modern society, how do they get to be those people? How do we view them? How do we show on stage this character as kind of a function of not just like an archetypal villain in a super problematic show, but as a representation of a real person who is doing a lot of harm? Because these shows imitate life, and these incredibly problematic things happen in life, and you can highlight that by putting it on stage in an understanding way, in a responsible way.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well said, Jonah. And I think Asita actually has a thought on this one too. Asita, do you want to join us?
Yeah, I think one way to look at it is to not limit ourselves to what can be portrayed on stage, even given what is in the score, and looking at how these perspectives that, one of the examples I brought up earlier, how female perspectives that traditionally would be, so in COC, for example, how can we play it so that and this is just one example because it depends on how different people want to approach it. How can the two female roles, the two characters, actually be implicit in what is going on, as opposed to not really knowing that it's these two guys coming back in disguise. So that's just a brief thing I wanted to add, which is there are so many ways to play and reinterpret lines of text and be able to move a message along.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Asita. The Sonorous Cacophony WPG asks, how do we get opera companies and audiences on board with new opera or new ideas of what opera can be? That's a wonderful question. Marian, would you like to weigh in maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. I say take a risk and let them try it out. I think there's this fear of what new opera will be based on not really hearing the variety of what's out there now, and the fact that composers have moved into an era where they're including all sorts of different styles of new and old styles within their compositional techniques. And so it's not just, I mean, actually we listen to new music all the time when we're watching television. Those scores can be really, really new music, and we don't even notice because they are helping us to feel what is going on the screen. That happens on the stage too. So I think just take a risk and do what you need to with social media and all of these ways of reaching people ahead of time, to just give them clips of what they're going to see, so that they will just be so hungry for it by the time the tickets go on sale.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marian. And we have time for one last question from Rebecca Haas, who asks, what if we put something else at the center of our art making, something other than excellence through our traditional viewpoint? What voices could we hear? And I think we're actually going to do like a tag team answer on this one. Avery, Jean, Tay, and Asita, I think you all have thoughts. So let's bring you all back. Who'd like to start?
We're also polite.
I'm gonna volunteer every day.
Okay, you know I go for a long time, so you're gonna have to sit there.
Take it away.
What I really want to do is push that even further and kind of question, what does excellence mean? What is excellence? And I think for so long, like Rebecca has a very good point of like the steeped in the tradition. The traditional ways of how we viewed excellence is like, oh, they hit those notes really well, and their technique was incredible, and the sound was scientifically perfect, and it da-da-da-da. And like, yeah, great, that is one form of excellence, but the impact of what we're supposed to be doing, and all I do is talk about intent and impact. The intent of what we're doing with art is, at the end of the day, creating community spaces. It's about bringing people together. It's about making people feel seen. It's about making people reflect on themselves, on their communities, on their actions, on the ways that they are being treated. And you don't necessarily have to hit this amazing, perfectly technical note to achieve that. You know, there's so much to say about the shared experience of being in a space and watching someone, even if they don't have the perfect technique for it, diving right into what this is about, especially with opera being about emotion and showcasing emotion. If the emotion is there, why does it have to be in that same key as it's always been? If the emotion is there, why does this thing that's normally done as like a coloratura soprano have to be there? Why can't it be baritone if the emotion is there? Mm-hmm. If we are still experiencing this collective feeling, why does it have to be in that? And why is excellence attributed to technique instead of the impact of what it does for individuals and for communities on an emotional level?
Absolutely, Avery Jean. Do we want to do this popcorn style? So Avery Jean, do you want to volunteer the next person to speak?
Great. Taya, over to you.
Thank you for bringing up that, Avery Jean. So I would like to add that, oh man, I just lost my thought. Okay, so bringing it back to Rebecca's question, I think this idea of questioning what excellence is really embodying decolonization and embodying why we hold that at the top of this pyramid, or at this hierarchy of priorities, or of priorities, and also beyond that. I think, Avery Jean, what you were probably tapping into as well is that it's like, why do we do opera? Like, why opera? Why now? Why still keep doing it? And I think really questioning and going back to that fundamental question, why we're spending so much time and effort and energy and resources into opera, that needs to be clearly answered for oneself and for a community, for an industry, so we can really then go ahead and start to keep making new opera, or putting on the old. But why the old? You know? So some really great points you brought up. Thank you, Eugene. Okay, Asita, round us out.
Only one way to go but up, Asita.
Well, it makes me think of what art is, and for me, art is the expression of the human condition. And what does that mean? What does that mean for? I think that then brings up questions of for whom is your art? And I think for me, opera, like so many other art forms, is telling a story. It's telling a story through music. That's it. And I think there are lots of things, these ideas of excellence that opera, I'm going to say it, like opera needs to get over itself in certain ways and understand that excellence could just mean performing beautiful art that calls people in instead of excluding people. And that's what I think we need to explore, is how are the pieces we're putting on stage including or excluding people? Where do we go from there? So that would be my response to it, is this looking at what this idea of excellence is over the past few centuries and not being beholden to it.
And I don't know if you did this intentionally, Asita, but you bookended our conversation perfectly by bringing it back to this idea of musical storytelling and trying to pull people into this art form, which I know that we all, we at Amplified Opera talk a lot about how much we love this art form and how profoundly it's moved us, and how we really are invested in seeing more people seeing themselves in this art form. So thank you so much for that. Well, okay, I think we are at 8:32. That is all the time we have left for this evening's Q&A. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. I was trying to sort of keep us going at a good clip so we could address as many as possible. And my deepest apologies to the people whose questions we've missed. Hopefully we'll have an opportunity to connect some other time. I'd like to take a moment to thank tonight's guests, Tea Kasahara, Asita Tenekun, Avery Jean Brennan, Jonathan Christopher, Marian Newman, and Jonas Fungen. If you have questions or would like more information on much of what we chatted about today, make sure to check out the additional resources page that we mentioned at the top of this show. It's at coc.ca/gender and opera. And if you know of anyone who might be interested in what we discussed tonight, or if you would like to help us spread the word about this event, please let them know that a video of our chat will be available indefinitely on that very same webpage. So that is coc.ca/gender and opera. And lastly, if you are interested in exploring some of the COC's other digital programming, check out the full slate of Opera Everywhere offerings at coc.ca/everywhere. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy days to sit with us for a bit and chat. I hope you had a wonderful evening, and good night.